Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most notorious names in modern scandal. A wealthy financier whose life was defined by power, influence, and exploitation. He was accused of running a vast sex trafficking network that preyed on underage girls, a network that touched some of the most powerful elites in the world, exposing painful truths about justice, secrecy, and accountability. But even after his death, the story did not end. Instead, it transformed into a sprawling investigation, one that continues to shake governments, media, survivors, and the public to this very day. This is the story of Epstein, the Epstein Files, and why the world is still talking about them. In 2019, Jeffrey Epstein, a wealthy financier convicted of sex crimes involving minors, died in a U.S. federal jail. His death left unanswered questions about how far his criminal enterprise reached and who might have been involved. Years later, lawmakers passed a federal law demanding the release of government files connected to his investigations. What emerged shocked the world.
Agreed. The less they know, the better.
Jeffrey Epstein was born in 1953, a man who rose from obscurity to unimaginable wealth and influence. He presented himself as a powerful financier, moving effortlessly through the world's most elite circles, politicians, billionaires, royalty, yet never clearly explaining how his fortune was made. But behind the glittering image of success, there was a far darker reality. In 2008, after multiple underage girls accused him of sexual abuse, Epstein struck a plea deal in Florida that shocked the world. He admitted to soliciting a minor, served barely any jail time, and avoided federal prosecution, a deal many called a devastating failure of justice. More than a decade later, in 2019, federal authorities arrested him again, this time on federal charges for running a sex trafficking operation that preyed on vulnerable girls for years. The trial was meant to reveal the full truth. It never happened. Just weeks after his arrest, Epstein was found dead in his jail cell. Officials ruled it a suicide, but the timing, the lapses, the silence left the world with questions that remain unanswered. His closest associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, was later convicted of recruiting and grooming underage girls, confirming that Epstein's crimes were not isolated acts, but part of a calculated, organized system of abuse. In 2008, Epstein struck a controversial plea deal in Florida. He avoided federal prosecution for sex crimes and served only 13 months with work release privileges. The deal outraged victims, lawyers, and the public. It became a symbol of how wealth and influence can bend the scales of justice. Many wondered, were powerful allies shielding him, allowing him to escape the consequences of his crimes? After years of evading serious consequences, the law finally caught up with Jeffrey Epstein. In July 2019, federal authorities arrested him on charges of sex trafficking minors across Florida and New York. He was accused of recruiting underage girls, some as young as 14, into a network of abuse that stretched across states and involved powerful individuals. The arrest shook the nation. Media outlets covered it relentlessly. Survivors came forward, giving testimony that exposed the full scale of Epstein's crimes. Yet, even as the world watched, questions lingered. How had he avoided justice for so long? And who else had been protected by his wealth and influence? Epstein was denied bail and held in a Manhattan federal jail, awaiting trial. But just weeks later, on August 10, 2019, he was found dead in his cell. Officially, his death was ruled a suicide. But the circumstances, malfunctioning cameras, irregular guard shifts, and procedural lapses sparked suspicion, outrage, and conspiracy theories that persist to this day. The arrest, indictment, and death of Epstein would not close the case. It opened the floodgate. Investigations intensified. Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested, and the Epstein Files would soon begin to emerge, revealing the full extent of a sprawling criminal network. Ghislaine Maxwell was not a marginal figure in Jeffrey Epstein's world. She was central. Born in 1961, Maxwell was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, a powerful British media tycoon whose own death in 1991 was surrounded by controversy. Raised among wealth, politicians, and global elites, Ghislaine grew up understanding power, influence, and access. After her father's death, she moved to the United States, where she met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 1990s. Their relationship quickly became close, socially, personally, and operationally, according to survivor testimony and court findings. Maxwell acted as a recruiter, identifying young girls, often teenagers from vulnerable backgrounds. She groomed victims, building trust before introducing them to Epstein. She helped normalize abuse, framing it as massage, training, or opportunity. She acted as a gatekeeper, controlling access to Epstein and managing his households. She maintained Epstein's image among elites, hosting events and managing social connections. Prosecutors described her as the person who made Epstein's system function smoothly. For years, Maxwell appeared openly in elite circles, attending high-profile events, appearing in photographs with politicians, royalty, and business leaders, living a lifestyle of luxury, travel, and influence. Despite rumors and allegations circulating for years, she faced no legal consequences until after Epstein's death. In July 2020, Maxwell was arrested by federal authorities in New Hampshire. She was charged with sex trafficking of minors, transportation of minors for illegal activity, perjury for lying under oath in earlier civil cases. Her trial began in late 2021. Multiple survivors testified, describing in detail how Maxwell recruited and groomed them while they were underage. Behind every headline, behind every court document, there are human lives. The victims of Jeffrey Epstein were not numbers. They were children, teenagers, girls whose lives were altered before they had a chance to begin. Many were recruited from vulnerable backgrounds, promised help, money, opportunity. Instead, they were drawn into a world they did not understand and could not escape. For years, their voices were ignored, dismissed, silenced by power, wealth, and fear. Some were told no one would believe them. Others were threatened. Many carried the trauma alone for decades. But silence does not erase truth. Survivors came forward at great personal cost. They spoke in courtrooms, in interviews, in sworn testimony. They were not seeking fame. They were seeking acknowledgement, justice, and the simple recognition that what happened to them mattered. Some survivors became advocates. Some chose anonymity. Others struggled quietly with pain the world never sees. Not all survived long enough to see accountability. Their courage forced the truth into the light. This chapter is not about Epstein. It is about them. After Jeffrey Epstein's death, many believed the truth had died with him. They were wrong. What remained was a paper trail. Music builds subtly. The Epstein Files are not rumors. They are documents, court records, federal investigations, emails, financial transactions, flight logs, photographs, witness testimony. Together, they form a map, not just of Epstein's crimes, but of how a system allowed them to continue. These files reveal how Epstein operated across states and countries, how money moved, how access was granted, and how silence was maintained. They also reveal something uncomfortable. Epstein did not exist in isolation. He moved within elite circles, among politicians, business leaders, academics, celebrities. To be named in a document is not proof of a crime, but the files raise questions about proximity, about privilege, and about accountability. For years, many of these records were sealed, hidden from the public, locked away under claims of privacy, legal protection, and national interest. That secrecy became part of the story, because transparency is where justice begins. For years, the Epstein records remained sealed. Not destroyed, not lost, just hidden. Courts argued privacy. Lawyers cited legal protections. Institutions warned of consequences. But outside those courtrooms, pressure was building. Victims demanded transparency. Journalists demanded access. The public demanded answers. At the center of that pressure was a simple question. If justice is public, why was this case private? Eventually, the balance shifted. Judges ruled that certain Epstein-related records could no longer remain sealed. These decisions were not about revenge. They were about accountability. The release of documents did not declare guilt. It declared transparency. Thousands of pages were prepared for release. Court filings, depositions, exhibits. Some names were redacted. Others were not. Some information was delayed. Some arrived all at once. When the files finally became public, the reaction was immediate. Newsrooms mobilized overnight. Legal teams issued statements. Governments faced questions. And victims, some for the first time, saw their experiences acknowledged in official records. But transparency came with consequences. Speculation exploded. Misinformation spread. Names were shared without context. Courts repeatedly emphasized one critical point. Being named in a document is not the same as being charged. And justice requires evidence, not assumptions. Still, the mass release marked a turning point. Because secrecy had ended, the public could now see, not everything, but enough to ask better questions. The Epstein Files were no longer whispers. They were history, written in ink, and open to scrutiny. What the public expected was truth. What they received was silence in black ink. When the Epstein Files were finally released, the world leaned in, searching for names, networks, answers. Instead, page after page arrived scarred by redactions. Entire paragraphs erased. Key passages hidden. Some pages missing altogether. The promise of transparency felt incomplete. Names that witnesses referenced were gone. Timelines fractured. Connections blurred. And the question grew louder. Who decided what the public was allowed to see? Officials insisted the redactions were necessary to protect privacy, to preserve due process, to avoid unverified harm. But to many, it felt familiar. Information controlled, truth filtered, power protected. Journalists began counting the gaps. Activists compared versions. Online communities mapped what was missing and what might have been there. Public anger surged. If justice had nothing to hide, why hide so much? Protests followed. Petitions spread. Trust eroded. For victims, the redactions felt like another silencing. Another reminder that even in exposure, their full stories were still not being told. And for the public, one truth became clear. The files did not end the mystery. They deepened it. Because when documents meant to reveal history arrive half erased, the absence speaks as loudly as the words that remain. And the demand echoed across the world. Release the truth, or admit who it protects. As anger grew over redactions, another danger emerged. Rumors. Leaks without context. Names without evidence. Speculation spreading faster than facts. So what do the Epstein Files actually reveal? And what do they not? Let's draw the line. The files confirm that Jeffrey Epstein operated a long-term abuse and trafficking operation involving underage girls. This is established through victim testimony, flight logs, financial records, and court findings. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted for her role in recruiting, grooming, and abusing minors. A jury, after reviewing evidence, found her guilty beyond reasonable doubt. Epstein had contact with powerful people, politicians, businessmen, academics, royalty. Flight logs, calendars, and photos prove access and proximity. But here is where fact ends and fiction often begins. Mere appearance in documents, contact lists, or social circles does not equal criminal guilt. Many names appear because Epstein cultivated influence, not because crimes were established. Some accusations remain allegations. Some claims lack corroboration. Some stories were exaggerated, misquoted, or misused online. This distinction matters because truth does not need distortion, and justice collapses when facts are replaced with frenzy. The files also reveal something else, quieter, but just as important. Systemic failure, failures of oversight, failures of accountability, failures to act when warnings were already there. The scandal is not only about who was named, it is about who was ignored. Victims reported abuse for years, yet consequences came late and only partially. So the real revelation is this: the Epstein Files are not a final answer. They are a map of what was proven, what remains unproven, and what may never be fully known. And in between fact and fiction lies the most uncomfortable truth. Power delays justice, and secrecy feeds confusion, which is why separating evidence from rumor is not caution. As facts struggled responsibility, noise filled the vacuum. Television panels argued. Headlines shifted by the hour. Social media turned fragments into theories. The Epstein case became something else entirely. Not just a scandal, but a battlefield of narratives. Some media outlets chased ratings over responsibility. Speculation replaced verification. Sensational questions drowned out careful reporting. Every silence was treated as proof. Every redaction became a conspiracy. Every rumor found an audience. And yet, in the chaos, another pattern emerged. Damage control. Statements carefully worded. Legal teams issuing denials. Institutions distancing themselves, not from Epstein, but from accountability. Archives were scrubbed. Old photos reframed.
Association minimisée.
The goal was no longer truth. It was containment. At the same time, conspiracy culture exploded. Wild claims spread faster than evidence. False connections went viral. Distrust turned inward, undermining real victims and discrediting legitimate investigations. The tragedy was double-edged, because when everything is labeled a conspiracy, nothing is taken seriously. And when truth is buried under exaggeration, those responsible gain exactly what they want: confusion, fatigue, silence. Journalists faced pressure. Whistleblowers hesitated. Audiences became polarized. Believe everything or believe nothing. Both outcomes serve power. And somewhere beneath the spin, beneath the noise, beneath the damage control, the core question remained unanswered. How did this happen? And who allowed it to continue? Because the greatest shield for wrongdoing is not secrecy alone. It is distraction. Jeffrey Epstein is gone, but the system that allowed him to exist is not. That is why this story still matters. Because Epstein was not a monster operating in isolation. He was a symptom of power without accountability, of wealth without oversight, of influence strong enough to bend justice, and silence victims. This case exposed how easily warning signs were ignored, how voices were dismissed, how suffering was delayed behind status and connections. It showed us that justice does not always fail loudly. Sometimes it fails quietly, through paperwork, through delays, through decisions made behind closed doors. For the survivors, Epstein's death was not closure. It was an ending without answers. No full trial, no complete reckoning, no moment where every truth was heard. And for the public, the lesson was uncomfortable. That institutions meant to protect can hesitate. That transparency can be partial. That truth can arrive late, or not at all. But this story is not only about failure. It is also about courage, about those who spoke when it was dangerous, those who documented when it was inconvenient, those who refused to forget when the world wanted to move on. Because accountability does not end with one man. It lives in questions we keep asking, in systems we demand to be stronger, in how seriously we take the voices of the vulnerable. Epstein matters today because the conditions that enabled him still exist. In finance, in politics, in media, in silence. And the final truth is this: justice is not a moment. It is a process, one that only survives when power is watched, when truth is protected, and when we refuse to look away. This story ends here, but its warning does not.